Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about Philips. And how many of you know of Philips? So, okay, great, wonderful. So 100 is the big number there. 123-year history, 120,000 people, and operating in over 100 companies. And we had the task 3 years ago to create a cultural transformation at that scale. So how do you do that? How you do that is one person at a time, one team at a time. Because transformation doesn't happen by accident, it happens on purpose. And that's what I'm here to talk about. How did we create a purposeful, intentional transformation, one person at a time, one team at a time? And what I'd like to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so is transformation. Transformation isn't change in the sense that how many of us have been involved in change initiatives? And if you didn't put your hand up, I'd wonder where you've been, right? Because we've all had many, many change initiatives. But how many have heard in their organization, yeah, but we tried that 3 years ago? Oh, we did that 10 years ago. Oh, we had, and let me tell you, and then you get the old timers, right? Let me tell you about 20 years ago. So change, of course, is moving from A to B and kind of back to A over time. Transformation is shifting root perspective and not being able to go back to the place you started ever again. That's transformation. And what I want to talk about is how do you create that? The seeds of transformation that are in the caterpillar. So within each and every individual, all of us, as caterpillars at ground level, lie the seeds of potentiality to turn into the butterfly. How do you do that for 120,000 people in over 100 countries around the world? And it really starts one person at a time, one team at a time, because transformation doesn't happen by accident, it happens on purpose. So that's what I'd like to share with you is how we did this using 4 basic ideas that were merged at every step of the way. And the first idea is make it personal. Because after all, if you're transforming one person at a time, one team at a time, it can't be generic, it can't be so global that, as Massimo was talking to us this morning from Canon, whether it's those folks in Tokyo don't know what we're doing here in Europe, or in our case, those folks in Amsterdam don't have a clue, about the rest of the world. So make it personal. And I've always joked, working at the corporate headquarters, that the biggest question people have around the world is, what genius at corporate thought this one up, right? So it has to feel like it's about me personally. So make it personal. The second part of that is create a common language. And that common language has to be something that shows up organically. We think of organizations and we still use metaphors of organizations that are mechanistic, even human resources, right? With people. It's about people. Even this notion of frontline, militaristic, cogs in the wheel. Make it organic. Use the metaphor of human ecosystems or natural biological ecosystems, creating fluid adaptation. So when we talk about a common language, it's not everybody knows how to recite the vision, say the vision and everybody recites it. It's literally about having things show up organically so that it feels like that's just the way we do things around here. And we'll show you how we did that. The third element is blend your formal elements, because we're all HR professionals here, so of course you're going to hear about things like performance management, talent management, recruitment, executive onboarding, business cycles, all of those things. But make sure that it's also built in, not just formally, but informally, that you create what my mentor John Kotter calls a want-to organization. People want to be part of this. Like, sign me up. I want to be part of this. I want to engage in this. So it's really engaging the formal and the viral elements of the transformation. And then lastly, it's just a very simple thing, which is organizations don't change, people change. So make sure that we always keep that in view. Very similar to Make It Personal, remember that culture is about us. It's not out there somehow. And those 4 elements came together for us, and I'll do my best to show you how they blend year over year, because we're in our 3rd year now. So this looks probably somewhat familiar to you, even though yours might look a little different. And it's what we call our culture wheel, at the center of which are our behaviors, and around the edges, around that outer circle, are our competencies. So we started with some behaviors that said, what do we need to shift in this culture? What do we actually need to transform? And the first was, and we heard that again this morning with Canon and many, many companies, raise your hands if you recognize this. The company gets very successful by being very, very relevant to customers, and then over time gets so big that it's just pushing things through the channels, pushing things into the market. The business is seeing the market as the handmaiden, and we get bloated and very enamored of our processes, and we become internally focused. Anybody recognize that? Versus eager to win, customer and market relevant. Right? So that was our first behavior. How do you really take that entrepreneurial edge and sharpen it so that I really look at and listen to what my customer has to say? The second behavior had to do with this notion that sometimes when you've had a lot of change and transformation, and that's true for every company, I'm sure if I asked you, would be the case, people tend to do this. This too will pass. Wait till we get a new CEO. Wait till a new manager comes in. Yeah, I remember that from 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And they go under the radar. And they start underperforming. Not everybody, because of course you always have eager people. But as a culture, as a company, people were not taking responsibility end to end. Customer complained, yeah, but that's, the guys over and ordered cash. That's not my department. Customer didn't like what was going on in terms of the quality of the product, but that's quality. That's not my department. So it was, I am accountable, I take ownership, and I take ownership end to end. Meaning, it's not just my team that's cool if they would just do what they had to do, right? I mean, if those guys in sales really understood what they were doing, then I wouldn't have this problem. And in, R&D, I mean, great, they're coming up with all kinds of things. Give me something I can sell. And then, if they would just fix the invoice system so that customers didn't have 7 invoices every time they got a product, I'd do great, right? My team is good. And in fact, our EES results said exactly that. My team is great. It's all those other teams that weren't. You recognizing some of these things? So we said, well, let's put our behaviors together to shift fundamental things about the culture that needed to shift and surround that by always acting with integrity. Now, what is integrity? Integrity is about wholeness. It's about, I know who I am, and I know what I stand for, and I'm willing to take a stand. I'm willing to do that every day with everyone I meet, whether it's a fellow employee in another team or in mine, with my customer, with people in the community. Integrity. So, how many of us have behaviors? So what's the million-dollar question here? It's not, are my behaviors better than your behaviors? Or are these behaviors really different? Or are the things we're trying to address really unique? No, that's not the question, is it? The question is, how do you bring it to life and make it personal? How do you create a common language around it? How do you make it formal as well as viral? And how do you make it owned so that we are truly the culture? And in year 1, we introduced it. We had, of course, the stakeholder forums around the globe. So we introduced it by coming up with various stakeholders telling us what they thought were the right behaviors. We did a vision jam, which was based on our vision, but using what we fundamentally knew we needed to shift in our culture, using the behaviors as a kind of a template or anchor point against what those behavioral shifts were that we needed. And we ran a vision jam to say, let's reinvigorate our vision, not around the behaviors, but around the need for the business to shift. And industry benchmark was 3% participation when you get with executives, right? At the executive level. They're not going to get online and say, yeah, this is what I think the vision should say. Maybe you'll get 3%. We got 67% participation rate. Why? Human nature. People like to be asked their opinion. And if they're going to engage in something, they would like to have a hand in having created it. Again, not rocket science, very simple, very fundamental. That was year one. Year two, of course, we started embedding that in the how and the what. I know the question comes up all the time. Yeah, but what about the guys or women who are performing well but don't have the best behavior? Right? They're doing it at the expense of the famous manage up but really can't manage across, and for sure don't manage down too well. How do you manage that? How do you handle that? And of course, we just very simply did what probably many of you do. We said there's the what and there's the how, and you get rated on both as a unified principle. You cannot possibly get to, top right box in the grid if you don't have role model behavior. So we made that a fundamental principle in year two. In year three, we said, if you start one person at a time, that was our PPM, our performance management cycle, how do you get to teams? How do you begin to really interact one team at a time? And we created, along with the competencies, conversations, team conversations, to say, okay, every team needs to have a conversation about how they activate the behaviors and the competencies. And what do you notice about those competencies if you look at them? Fairly straightforward stuff, right? Customer focus, meaningful innovation, operational excellence, leading change, inspiring by example, delivering results. But what do you notice about that when you look at that? Anything jump out at you?
I.
It's I. Absolutely. It's the I. Make it personal. So how do I focus on customers in my business? But I'm a function. But I'm HR. I'm legal, I'm procurement. How do I? Yes, how do you? How do you define customer? And how do you focus? How do I? So we created in year three something we called the culture carpet. We used this as literally as a carpet. And we just literally rolled out the carpet to teams around the globe and just sent it to teams and created a leader-led dialogue. And that's the other piece, is we're great at HR. I mean, I'm a facilitator and a coach. I love this stuff. But I've spent my whole career making myself obsolete. Because if you're not in the business of prevention and capability building, you're in the business of dependency or function. And our philosophy is make it personal. Make it so that every manager, every team member, so it's not just the managers running these dialogues, it's team members. And we do, different things, simple card games to just facilitate the dialogue. And then we said, what really can get to the level of the team intervention where teams all say, okay, again, not my team, it's your team that's the problem. Well, if Amsterdam would allow us to do that, well, if corporate would allow us to do that, well, if, the business wouldn't just demand these targets, well, if we didn't just have to do vertically or horizontally integrated but could determine what our own targets were, all the reasons why people within teams feel disempowered. So we said, how do we get at that? How do we get at that shift in mindset and behaviors? And some of you may be familiar with Peter Senge's work out of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and then Otto Scharmer from the Presencing Institute, and a bunch of different folks, Joe Jaworski, Betty Sue Flowers. Anyway, the process here is we try to innovate by going from A to B, right? This is A. B is transformation, it's growth, it's put whatever KPIs or targets you want, that's B. And we think the quickest way to do it is a straight line. But fundamentally what happens is we keep doing what we've always done, expecting different results, which is the definition of, thank you, insanity, absolutely. So this is the go slow to go fast notion. And what it says is, if you really want to break through, you have to start by deep listening to your stakeholders. And so we create adaptive challenges with teams, and the team will say, what is my biggest challenge? And it could be a team in Shanghai, or it could be a team in San Diego. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just the team then, and the team leader is able to craft, what's my big adaptive challenge? Let's put that in the center. And what do my stakeholders say about that? So whoever my stakeholders are, they might be consumers, customers, they might be hospital administrators, or they might be people within other parts of the business who we serve from a functional perspective. It doesn't matter. They could be vendors, suppliers. What do they say is our biggest challenge? And what would they like from us? So how often do we openly ask for feedback from others? So we did that, and then after we go there, we use different techniques to hit what is it that this team keeps doing over and over again. So for example, we have a great belief in teamwork and collaboration, but what is it that keeps getting in our way? And so we go from team focus, and then we begin to drill down to the individual focus. Well, I actually am so used to getting, recognition myself. I'm worried if I collaborate with others, it'll dilute the recognition I get. That is an admission that is very vulnerable for people to make. So how does that really feed teamwork and collaboration? Well, I'm worried that if I collaborate with others, they'll slow me down. Sound familiar? Those are the kinds of mindset shifts that we get to. And what we did in year 1, we worked with top team, the top layer, right? So the CEO and the layer below. In year 2, we started getting into middle managers and at the same time training people to do these workshops, getting them to understand the blind spot, and only then can you get to breakthrough and start moving fast with small experimental actions. Not big projects, not multi-year task lists, but what can I do on Monday? Make it personal, make it quick, make it agile, make it team-based, make it relevant. And now in year 3, we have a cadre of people around the globe who are facilitating these sessions, and we've now broken them into modules that are leader-led. So how can I apply a module right at the time that I need it, right when my business and my team is ready for it? Common language is going to show up. This is actually here in the UK in our sales facility, and this is where we talk about things like the elephants in the room, hitting the pause button, standing on the balcony, the Ron Heifetz work, standing on the balcony and being in the dance. So we use this to continuously show up organically. And this just showed up on a wall in a place where the management team meetings are held. And then people started pushing around those pause buttons, these little like kids games, so that if somebody triggers you, really irritates you in a meeting, you hit the pause button to get your own breath back and your own reaction. And then if the team keeps getting stuck in the same dynamic, maybe you bring the elephant out. So simple, organic things that show up every day in every way possible. And then we have teams continuously reinforce their big from-to behavior shifts. So looking at what do I need to shift from as a team to get to whatever that B is, that breakthrough is, and what do we need to do and what's my part in it. So these should look pretty familiar, but I'll just point out one. Moving from, if I didn't have 3 layers of approval, and until we change the policies, there's nothing I can do, right? Victim complaining, to what is right now within my control, and what are the kinds of courageous conversations I would need to have with different people, whether it's in my team or other teams, in order to move the needle, in order to take accountability, in order to stand up and be counted. And now, in year 3, this has become a common language across the organization. And when we look at this, just let me close by talking a little bit about impact year on year. So we started to initiate year 1. We ignited in year 2, where it became viral and people started coming up with their own mechanisms. Year 3, it's about integrating into the business. So we integrate on a quarterly business cycle to create a team cadence, to have quarterly team dialogues with a diagnostic measure. But we also use our quarterly cycle for our individual performance management. And then we have it show up organically, like you saw, posters in the conversation, whenever, wherever. So it's not just within the HR processes, but it's part of the ongoing business cycle where teams say, what's one thing that we can do this quarter that would make the biggest difference? So you can see here, impact is on people personally, on their whole self, who they are when they are at work and at home. It's on the team, and it's on the business. And I'll give you one quick business example. So we had to shift, eager to win, taking ownership, and teaming up to excel. So Mr. Rice, no joke, there was a Mr. Rice in China who was one of the people behind the rice cooker. And someone said, well, why don't we take the rice cooker to Russia? Well, it didn't do that well in Russia. Why? Because people don't eat a lot of rice in Russia. So they brought Mr. Rice over to go into the kitchens of the Moscow housewives. And what they found was that they loved porridge in the morning for their families and stews in the evening to do dinner. So we turned the rice cooker into a multi-purpose cooker. And that's why it went through the roof, right? 300% market share. And it just became, again, another example of when you change people's mindsets about listening, about I can do things differently, about things are within my control, you get that type of an impact. So finally, again, just a reiteration, speak to the personal part of why do I show up every day for work? What makes this meaningful for me? How do we create rituals so that it just feels like this is how we do things around here? And how do we create that sign me up, I want to be a facilitator, I want to be a team leader, I want to do these modules, I don't have to be a manager, I don't have to be an HR professional, I just have to be a person who has passion. And finally, always remember that we are the culture. Organizations don't change, people change. And to quote our friend Rumi, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. But today I am wise, and so I change myself. Thank you.
Take some questions.
Sure.
Can I kick off with one? To what degree was this about doing the right things better or doing things different? Because a lot of these things people will aspire to be doing, more customer focus, more collaboration, courageous conversations, etc. And I'm just wondering where the balance was in that, because you know, the culture change often gives you the feeling that you have a culture that you're trying to take in a distinctive direction, or it could be about actually making a diverse culture a bit more consistent, but just more high-performing. And I'd just be interested in your view on that in terms of the journey.
Well, the short answer is change is doing things in a little bit different or incremental way. Transformation is really awakening a whole new sense of purpose and spirit for people. So in that sense, I would say we had to really reawaken The fact that you were not just a lifetime employee generation after generation, but in fact, you were an entrepreneur in your own right, even if you're sitting in an office
Yes.
that looks a whole lot like a corporate environment.
Yeah.
And that I would have to characterize as a kind of a reawakening in individuals and teams, this notion that I can personally make a difference and have impact.
Right. But do you think Philips has become more distinctive? Because I always have a strong sense of Philips as, well, you know, a Dutch-based company with
Yes.
certain cultural leanings, etc. And I'm
Yes.
just interested in, you know, whether you feel it's moved in a distinctive direction, or in some respects it's become more globally consistent.
I'd say both, actually.
Right.
Because part of the notion was, you know, we don't do things that way around here. So
Yeah,
it doesn't
sure.
matter if we have those sorts of global
Yeah.
processes. So from an operational excellence standpoint, and for those of you who might have heard Frans van Houten, our CEO, speak in June in Amsterdam, that's one of his big passions, is making sure that don't reinvent the wheel. Don't put your
Yeah,
energy
sure.
into things that you could do very simply and easily from a global level, but put your energy into where you can have impact. And so in that sense, I think Philips is rather unique, largely because the CEO owns this. And if you have the CEO and the top leadership team saying, if we don't shift the culture, we're not going to make a difference, regardless of how many processes, systems, structures, product innovations we put in place. If we don't fundamentally work with people's behavior and mindsets, we won't make a difference. So the answer, I believe, is yes. 3 years is a short time for transformation, but I believe we're going in the right direction.
I'm surprised you got 3 years. Was there an
Yeah.
argument at the time about, okay, 3's good, but could we do it in 2?
Of course.
Can we do it in
in
1?
6 months?
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Fantastic. Please, take your question.
Thanks ever so much, Teddy. You really struck a chord with me in your presentation. My organisation is at year 0 with regards to transformation, so we're just embarking where you are 3 years on. So what advice would you give to either yourself 3 years ago or me just about to embark on this journey?
That's a great, it's a great vantage point to have. One thing, of course, is, as you well know, making sure that the CEO owns it and not HR. And I love HR, and I love operations and business transformation, but if you don't have your business leader saying, keep the focus on making sure that people really walk the talk, it's very easy to become just a jargony, programmatic, exercise. So that's number one. Number two is, what are you trying to cause? And stay clear on that. What are you trying to cause from day one? And then how can you really enable people within the organization to live that every single day in the simplest way? So it's the leader-led idea and the focus on everybody as a leader, not just the formal leaders. So those are really the two, I would say, capability building and ensuring that it is absolutely and continuously reinforced at the very top of the house.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. Going through a process at the moment of trying to redefine or define our EVP, we've come to a bit of a stalemate because there's two strands of thought really, that we're as a business we need to be much more ambitious. Therefore is our EVP very ambitious and a statement of intent, but then the risk of that is disconnection from people who are already with us or people that join us, because it does feel different to what we're promising.
Yeah.
So what would you advise? I guess there's somewhere in between the two, but where?
Yeah. I just did the Constellation, speaking of constellations, recently with a top team around that exact issue and said, okay, where are you in the pace of change? So there were people that wanted to go really, really quickly, and that was the disruptive part. And there were people that had been, whether they were lifers or had just come to the company, much more on the status quo. And so I said, okay, you represent status quo, you represent absolute breakthrough. Now line up where you're comfortable. And the majority of people lined up somewhere in between. Some had leanings here, some had leanings here. And so we said, it's about performing whilst transforming. Keeping your focus on the business at all times so you don't disrupt it too much, which makes people comfortable because you create some safety there. And At the same time, really looking at, if you keep going back to your old customer selling conventional lighting, you're not going to break through to the LED market. So you can't just rely on hitting your targets by doing the same old thing. So you also now need to shift, as an example. So you're right, it's a both and, but I believe if you go too fast in the one direction, you will actually disrupt your short-term, and then your business will fall down and you'll lose the confidence. If you go too slow, of course, you'll never get there. And so I think the question there is keeping the pace, always keeping that sense of urgency, but also creating enough grounding for people that not everything shifts under their feet at the same time. Sure.
One final question with a precise, quick answer, maybe.
Yes, a concise answer. Absolutely.
I'll ask a quick question then. How did you build in the how, in the what and how? We're starting that journey, and I have lots of engineers that want very mechanistic answers to that one.
Yeah, 3-point scale, same deal. You know, where you say, okay, are you exhibiting the behaviors on that 3-point scale? We put language to it. We put criteria behind it. And you could only get to the top of it if you were truly a role model, and we educated managers and their teams. We built it into what would that look like, and then started creating communications around when someone got promoted, not just because of the results that they got, but also who they are and how they did it. So that was, yeah.
But I guess it's being
calibrating it, of course.
But it's
Yes.
getting very tangible, isn't it, about those behaviours, particularly with
Yes.
engineers. You know, it needs to be objective, because it's how doesn't mean it make it fluffy. It's
That's
more
right. That's
quite
right.
the opposite. Yeah.
And making sure those talent conversations then really become those conversations. And that, by the way, didn't happen overnight. That's truly been a 3-year journey. Yeah.
Teddy, thank you very much. That was
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thanks very much.